Cruise lines are tightening the rules in 2026, and it's catching a lot of passengers off guard. Some of these changes involve things people bring on board every cruise. Others are about behavior that used to be ignored, but suddenly isn't anymore. And in a few cases, getting this wrong doesn't just mean a warning. It can mean confiscation, fines, or even being denied boarding altogether. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the new cruise ship bans and crackdowns happening right now, including tech items, family rules, and a final one that's already stopping people from getting on the ship at all, often with no compensation. If you're cruising in 2026, this is one of those videos you'll want to watch before you pack, because several of these rules aren't obvious and they're being enforced far more strictly than they used to be. Let's start with one of the newest and most unexpected changes. Number 1. Smart glasses are now restricted on cruise ships. Smart glasses, like the Meta Ray-Ban glasses, are one of the newest things cruise lines are starting to clamp down on, and this one has caught a lot of people by surprise. MSC Cruises is already enforcing a ban on using smart glasses in public areas of the ship. That includes places like dining rooms, pool areas, theaters, and other shared spaces where privacy becomes an issue. On these ships, you're only allowed to use smart glasses inside your cabin or when you're ashore. If you're seen using them in restricted onboard areas, crew can ask you to stop, and in some cases, the glasses can be confiscated for the rest of the cruise. Carnival is a little more relaxed for now, but even they are already banning smart glasses during gangway and security processes. So you can bring them on board, but you can't use them while boarding or going through security checks. The reason cruise lines are focusing on this is privacy and security. These devices can record video and audio without other passengers or crew realizing, and cruise lines are becoming far less comfortable with that. There's also been some pushback from cruisers with sight impairments who use smart glasses as an accessibility aid, but at the moment, the restrictions are still moving forward. This is very much one to watch, because all signs suggest more cruise lines will follow MSC's lead, and this could become a much wider ban very quickly. Number 2. High-capacity power banks are being restricted. Power banks have quietly become one of the most watched items during cruise ship security checks, and this is an area where enforcement has tightened noticeably. Many cruise lines are now placing limits on the size and type of lithium power banks you're allowed to bring on board. Some are capping the watt-hour capacity, while others are limiting how many power banks a single passenger can carry. What's catching people out is that power banks that appear damaged, swollen, unbranded, or poorly labeled are increasingly being confiscated at the terminal. Even if you've traveled with the same one before, that doesn't mean it will be allowed again. The reason behind this is fire risk. Cruise ships have had multiple battery-related incidents in recent years, and lithium batteries are now treated far more seriously than they used to be. This is also why cruise lines are paying closer attention to devices that generate heat, charge other devices, or draw high power. Power banks are no longer seen as harmless travel accessories. They're now considered a potential safety risk. If you rely on a power bank for travel, it's worth checking the capacity, condition, and labeling before you cruise, because this is one of those rules that's being enforced more strictly at the port than many passengers expect. Number 3. Charging devices left unattended is now being flagged. Leaving phones, tablets, laptops, or power banks charging while you're not around is something most people do without thinking. But on cruise ships, this is now being actively watched. Cruise lines are cracking down on devices that are left charging unattended, especially overnight or when they're placed on beds, couches, or other soft furnishings. These are now considered higher fire risk situations, and crew are being given more authority to step in. In some cases, devices have been unplugged by crew for safety reasons, and if a power bank or charging device shows signs of overheating, damage, or malfunction, it can be confiscated. This is a big shift for a lot of cruisers because hotels generally allow this without any issue. Cruise ships don't treat it the same way. Fire risks at sea are taken far more seriously, and lithium battery incidents have pushed this higher up the priority list. If you're charging devices in your cabin, the safest approach now is to do it while you're present. Keep them off beds and sofas, and avoid leaving anything charging overnight while you're asleep. It's a small habit change, but it's one that's increasingly being enforced. Number 4. Fake service animals are now getting guests denied boarding. Cruise lines have tightened their rules around animals on board, and this is one area where there's far less flexibility than there used to be. Only fully documented service animals are now accepted. Emotional support animals are no longer allowed on most cruise lines, and incomplete or incorrect paperwork is being flagged much more carefully at check-in. What's changed is enforcement. Documentation is being reviewed more closely, and guests arriving with paperwork that doesn't meet the cruise line's exact requirements are being denied boarding, often without compensation. Cruise lines say this is about safety, hygiene, and fairness, particularly for passengers with legitimate service animals. Fake or misleading documentation has become more common, and lines are now actively cracking down on it. This is one of those rules where there's very little room for argument at the terminal. If the paperwork isn't right, boarding can be refused on the spot. If you're traveling with a service animal, it's now essential to check your cruise line's requirements carefully and make sure everything is approved well before sail day. Number 5. Private cash games and cabin gambling are banned. A lot of cruisers don't realize this one because it often happens quietly, but gambling on cruise ships is restricted to the casino only. Private poker games or cash games held in cabins, lounges, or other non-casino areas are banned. If crew become aware of it, the game can be shut down immediately, and in some cases, cash or chips can be confiscated. Cruise lines enforce this rule for 2 reasons. The first is regulation. Gambling laws at sea are very specific. The second is revenue. Casinos are a major income source for cruise lines, and private games cut directly into that. What's changed recently is how quickly this is acted on. Crew are less likely to give warnings, especially if the game involves cash or is drawing attention from other passengers. If you enjoy poker or casino games, the safest option is to keep it inside the ship's casino. Anything that looks like organized gambling elsewhere on the ship is now much more likely to be stopped. Number 6. Group takeovers and disruptive themed behavior are being shut down. Cruise lines are becoming far less tolerant of large groups that behave like a takeover of the ship, and this is something that's increased noticeably with the rise of viral cruise content online. Organized chanting, mass pranks, coordinated disruptions, or themed behavior that spills into shared spaces is now more likely to be treated as disruptive conduct rather than harmless fun. What's changed is how it's handled. Instead of being ignored or laughed off, these groups are increasingly being broken up by security. Some have been removed from bars or venues, others restricted to their cabins, and in more serious cases, disembarked at the next port. Cruise lines say this is about protecting the experience for everyone on board. When one group dominates shared spaces or draws repeated complaints, it's now seen as a breach of guest conduct rules. This crackdown is being driven largely by social media trends, where behavior is sometimes staged for content without considering other passengers. If you're cruising as part of a group, the key difference now is scale. Small celebrations are fine, but anything that feels organized, loud, or disruptive across the ship is much more likely to be stopped. Number 7. Unescorted minors now face fines and possible disembarkation. Cruise lines are enforcing curfews for guests under 18 far more strictly than they used to, and this is catching many families by surprise. On several major lines, children are no longer allowed to roam the ship unescorted after certain hours. What's new isn't the rule itself, it's the consequences. Repeat curfew violations are now leading to formal warnings, financial penalties, and in some reported cases, the threat of forced disembarkation at the family's own expense. One recent example involved a family being warned of a substantial fine after just a single breach. Cruise lines say this is about safety and supervision, particularly late at night when fewer crew are around and alcohol is more present in public areas. This is no longer being handled casually. Once a child is flagged for breaking curfew, the booking can be marked and future incidents are taken much more seriously. If you're cruising with children or teenagers, it's now important to know your ship's specific curfew rules and make sure they're being followed, because the penalties escalate quickly. Number 8. Leaving children alone in cabins is now treated as a serious violation. This one is separate from curfews, and it's something many parents don't realize is being actively enforced. Cruise lines are cracking down on children being left alone in cabins, even briefly, and even if the child is asleep. What some parents see as a short trip to get food or attend an activity is now being treated as a safety issue. In reported cases, crew or security have been called when children were found alone in cabins. That has led to written warnings, booking notes, and in more serious situations, threats of disembarkation. Cruise lines say this comes down to emergency response. If something goes wrong in a cabin, Fire alarms, medical issues, evacuations, unattended children create serious risk. This isn't about judgment, it's about enforcement. What may have been overlooked in the past is now being handled formally, especially if another guest reports it. If you're cruising with children, the expectation is now very clear. Children must be supervised at all times, including inside the cabin. Number 9. Personal Wi-Fi routers and signal boosters are being blocked. With more cruise ships rolling out Starlink and upgraded onboard Wi-Fi systems, cruise lines have quietly started cracking down on personal networking devices. Personal Wi-Fi routers, repeaters, and signal boosters are banned because they can interfere with the ship's network and, in some cases, onboard systems. What's changed is detection. These devices are now much easier for ships to identify once they connect to the network. When detected, devices can be disconnected remotely. In some cases, crew have asked guests to surrender the device, particularly if it keeps reconnecting or causing interference. Many passengers don't even realize this is an issue because these devices are commonly used in hotels and apartments. Cruise ships operate very differently, and network interference at sea is taken seriously. If you're trying to improve your cabin Wi-Fi, using a personal router is now far more likely to get flagged than it was in the past. Number 10. Oversized mobility scooters can now get you denied boarding. This is one of the most serious crackdowns happening right now, because it can stop your cruise before it even begins. Cruise lines are now strictly enforcing rules around mobility scooters fitting through the door of the cabin you've booked. If a scooter can't fit through a standard stateroom door, an accessible cabin must be booked in advance. Scooters also must be stored inside the cabin at all times and are never allowed to be left in hallways. While this rule has existed for years, enforcement is now far stricter than many passengers realize. What's catching people out is that if a guest arrives at check-in with a scooter that doesn't meet the size requirements for their booked cabin, they can be denied boarding on the spot. In many cases, this happens without compensation. Cruise lines say this is about evacuation safety and keeping corridors clear, but for affected passengers, the outcome is the same. The cruise ends before it begins. If you rely on a mobility scooter, it's now essential to check the exact size requirements and make sure the correct cabin type is booked well before sail day.